College football playoff rankings just unveiled. This is the last batch of rankings, mind you, before we get to conference championship Saturday and then selection Sunday. And so you start chewing those fingernails down to the nub as the weekend approaches. And we obviously got a lot of different scenarios. When we entered this season, I told you I thought it was going to be a renaissance season for many reasons, but chief among them was I did not think the Redwoods, as I called them in the sport, were nearly as tall as they normally are. Case in point, Clemson, chopped down to size. Alabama's very vulnerable. Georgia hadn't won a title in 41 years. They're the tallest redwood in the sport right now. That pretty much encapsulates what a renaissance season is all about. I thought on ESPN tonight when they were doing the reveal, they had a really good stat. And that was our top four right now of Georgia, Cincy, Michigan, and Alabama. And then if you project forward like an Oklahoma State, it was like a combined one playoff win, I think it was. So, yeah, there's a lot of new blood here. Having said that, it may be that the dominoes are not done falling. So you're looking at the rankings if you're watching on YouTube right now, and the current matchups, which almost are impossible to happen, would be Georgia, Cincy. Georgia would be favored by about 17 in that game. Bama, Michigan. Bama would be about a 5-point favorite in that game. That's not our model. That's actual Vegas number. I could give you our model output, but I wasn't prepared to do that. So who's still alive in this thing is what I want to ask. Because I know you got Ohio State sitting there at 7. I don't think there's any path, to be real with you, where Ohio State makes it in here. But let's just talk about the craziness. If the craziness were to happen, craziness, of course, would be Cincinnati losing as, let's say, a 10.5-point favorite. We're going to break that game down in a little while. Let's say Cincy does lose. Let's say it gets really sideways. Let's say Iowa beats Michigan. What starts to happen there? So let's just say Georgia wins. So you got Georgia in there. But let's say Michigan falls and they're out. Or let's say Cincy falls and they're out. Well, you're talking about Notre Dame, which is just this whole other can of worms that is fascinating that I'm going to talk about in just a second when we're talking about the Notre Dame coaching search. But just to tease it up, I want you to picture a world where the Notre Dame Fighting Irish are in the playoff, and whoever is leading them, Jack Swarbrick doesn't allegedly want to name an interim head coach, but whoever's leading them, I'm just going to say Marcus Freeman. What if they end up winning a playoff game that they had never done under Brian Kelly, and Brian Kelly's gone, even though he started the year as the head coach there? That would be insanity. So bookmark that, because I'm going to talk about that more in just a second. But Ohio State's out of this thing, and here's how I figure that. I don't see any path for them in, which is the very definition of being out. I mean, I was thinking about Georgia winning. If Georgia wins, Bama's out, but I still think you've got the Big 12 champion at the very least, even if it's Baylor, I think is in over Ohio State. By the very default of the SEC shaking out the way it does, I think either of those teams, Georgia certainly in either way, even if Georgia beats Bama, I think a 2-loss Bama that played for a conference title is probably still in over a 2-loss Oklahoma or Ohio State. So I don't know what their path is. I had a lot of people trying to present it. I don't know what their path is. I'll tell you the one that I'm very curious about, given that they are number 10. Could Oregon make it? If the craziest of crazies were to happen, could Oregon make it? So right now you're looking at their resume. They got 27 in the strength of schedule category. They're playing Utah this Saturday. Now here's why that's important. It's a conference championship game. And secondly, their worst loss, well, their widest margin loss is to Utah. So if you avenge yourself, then I wonder if people interpret that loss or define it a little bit different or value it a little bit differently. But also look at what could happen here. So I know you've got Ohio State listed above Oregon right now, but if Oregon added a conference championship to their resume and they still have that head-to-head over Ohio State, I think they'd vault the likes of Ohio State. I think they may, if you had Michigan fall out and you had Cincinnati fall out, I think there's this weird path along with the Big 12 champ where maybe an Oregon scoots in, maybe even past Notre Dame. I'd be very interested in how the committee would interpret a 2-loss conference champ Oregon against a 1-loss non-conference champ Notre Dame. We'll be very interested in that. And hey, here's another question someone asked today. I have no clue what the answer to this is. You can tell me if you have a different opinion than me, because I don't really have one. So your opinion is going to be different than mine if you have one at all. Let's say it is margins of micro inches either way. And let's say you've got a resume comparison on Selection Sunday of Notre Dame and fill in the blank. Do you think that committee would look you in the eye and say, when it came down to it, we penalized Notre Dame for not having a head coach? It's kind of like the injured player thing. Should you be punished for having a key player injured, or should you just be judged off your resume? I don't know what the answer to that is. I don't know that it's ever been thought to be a possibility. Will we ever be talking about a program in the playoff whose head coach has left? Because it defies logic. But that's where we are. Two other things to pay attention to. If Georgia wins, they're the 1 seed. If Georgia loses, still very curious where they fall. I don't see them falling past 3 at all. So that's the first thing. The second thing is if Bama wins Saturday against Georgia and Michigan wins, who is your number 1 seed? Bama's behind Michigan tonight. They would both have conference championship wins, but Bama would have that trump card of having beaten the number 1 team in the country. I think Bama would be the 1 seed. That's what I think, but I'm very interested to see how that plays out. Of course, the chalk could hold, and all of that could be irrelevant, so we'll see.